Well, the sun is back. The sun is back. Hallelujah, hallelujah. We needed the rain, but it's awfully nice to have the sun shining. And no, I'm not at the beach, even though my background would admit that I am. That's not real. That's where I live, but not where I am today. So welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you with us this morning, and excited to welcome Amanda and the great team at NP Strategy. I've worked with NP Strategy myself here for many years, and they always do a great job and just have so much knowledge to impart. And so we're really looking forward to this session this morning. I'd encourage everyone, as you have questions, as Amanda is walking you through things, put them in the chat for us. There's a number of us from the Together SC team that are here that can be monitoring that chat and taking a look at those, and then we'll be able to get to all of your questions as you are thinking of them. So I see Brooke Robertson from our team here, and also want to introduce to everyone, Grace Williams is our new membership and development manager. Wave, Grace. So she is here at the ready, week one for Grace. Happy to have her on board. And of course, the incomparable Desmond A. White is manning the team here for this peer network learning today. So without further ado, I am going to turn the microphone and the presentation over to Amanda Loveday. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate being here today. Is there, Brooke and Grace, were there any Together SC announcements you wanted to make before we got started? We good? Okay.
Yep, we're all good. You can go ahead.
All right, great. Thank you. I wasn't sure if there's any other housekeeping that needed to be done, but I appreciate, Karen, the introduction and being invited to speak with you guys today about adaptive messaging and what has been happening over the last 9 months with federal funding. Had a lot of conversations in the last 48 hours about the continued government shutdown and what that means for some of our clients and the funding and the access to certain programs that folks will lose at the beginning of next week. And all of that requires adapting. Whether our organizations, whether it's a nonprofit like you all or a corporate client that we're working with, you have to adapt in the way of what is happening in society, in the news, in whatever may be going on day to day. And if you don't, then you are going to lose the conversation. And so part of this presentation today is going through how to adapt and what that means and what that could look like for your organization. And then some tips that can help you do it. And then obviously answer some questions at the end that might be helpful as well. Karen mentioned working with NP Strategy, and we appreciate the partnership we've had with her. Just to give quick background, NP Strategy is a strategic communications firm that is based across the Southeast. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Maynard Nexsen, which is a business law firm across the country. However, NP Strategy is focused in 5 current markets in Raleigh, Charlotte, Charleston, Columbia, and Birmingham. We have 26 team members who provide a variety of services in the strategic communications realm, from general public relations and media relations to messaging and community assessment. We work with nonprofits and corporations to help them achieve what we're going to talk about today. So if any of you hear something that you need an extra hand in, or feel like some supplemental assistance would be necessary to be successful in your efforts and your goals, we obviously would be more than happy to help you guys do that. So what we're going to discuss today. So first off is just developing clear communications. As I mentioned, it has been a tough year for nonprofits. It's been a tough year for those who have expected federal funding, and actually in South Carolina, state funding, right? All of our earmarks went away this year. And all of that comes with a changing organization. And so we will talk about how to develop those clear communications in that changing and evolving environment that we're in, addressing the federal funding cuts, addressing the state cuts that I know a lot of you were affected by, and a lot of your peers were affected by, mobilizing donor and stakeholder support, and articulating what it means to do what you all do at your organization. Obviously, I can't address all 25 nonprofits that are on the call right now, but can talk through generalities of what it means to talk about what it is that you do and how funding or how communications can be useful in making sure that those who are giving you money on a government level or even on a donor level, individual donor level, can understand why their involvement with your organization is so critical. So the current reality, I've said it a number of times in the few minutes we've been here, but we have seen an immense amount of cuts across the board from federal and state grant funding and just general funding to the nonprofit landscape. And with those changes, nonprofits have had to adapt. I serve on a number of boards, and on those boards, we've had to figure out how to be successful in a world where grants are not as prevalent and funds are not coming as quickly or as readily as they have in the past, and that we're all competing for the same dollars. In South Carolina, we all know that we can all name the top 10 donors across the state, and whether that's corporations or individuals, they're very fluent in the support of nonprofits. But what happens after that list of 10? Who are we talking to? What are we saying to them? And how are we getting them involved? And I say this to the organizations I work with frequently, and I'll talk about it a little bit more into the slides. But how are we cultivating that next generation of donor? If you're going to we'll say Joe Rice, because I passed by the law school this morning. If you're asking Joe Rice for money, who's the next Joe Rice, right? Who's the person that your organization could be cultivating a relationship with that makes that Joe Rice donation in 10 years? And figuring out what that looks like for South Carolina is imperative, and the nonprofits that figure it out are going to be more successful into the future. Because just like in a voting population, I tell folks in my other life when I worked in politics that the next generation now has more voting capacity than the current generation that is in our highest voting block, and which is the baby boomers. And so with that, what are we doing to communicate to the millennials and younger because I said capacity, right? They have the capacity to vote in larger numbers than the baby boomers, but they're not doing it. And donors are the same way, right? So your older donors, who are your typical folks that are coming to you year after year, are hearing from you. They know what you do. They know what you're asking for and why you're asking for it. But who's cultivating that next generation? Because their capacity is growing rapidly, and they're just not as engaged. Stakeholders, talked a little bit about that just now on, who are your stakeholders? Who might be the folks that you just go back to time and time again, because they are critical and important. But who's building up, again, that next generation of your stakeholders to make sure that you're developing a communication strategy that they are latching onto. That group of people that may not donate tomorrow, but may donate in a year or 2 years. And once they get that financial success that they're looking for to become nonprofit donors, they're going to have already been speaking to you for 2 or 3 years. And there's an incredible amount of power in being at the table before the ask is even made. And you all as folks in the fundraising world and in the development world know that. And then also adapting your messaging to show your sustainability. As I mentioned, I'm on a number of boards, and we in total probably lost $1 million in grant money in the last year across the number of boards that I serve on, and it was devastating. It is devastating to all of the organizations I work with. And as part of that shift, we had to continue to show our supporters, whether they were donors, whether they were customers to the organization, clients, the kind of government and powers that be that are watching the organizations, and the media. We had to have the sustainability messaging that showed that it hurt that we were losing these funds, but that the organization was strong and sustainable and resilient. And if we didn't use that language, we were going to fall into the crater that is a lot of organizations right now, that people wonder how they're going to keep going. And we, as a parent, and if any of you are also parents, with our children, we have to show strength when we're trying to get them to stop doing what they're doing or adapting to whatever the day and stress is of being a parent. We have to show strength. And that's what this messaging is required to, as well. It might be a tough moment. It might be a situation where it feels really hard, but the stakeholders around you don't need to feel it. They need to see that you're willing to march forward and what it looks like to do so. Excuse me. And so we'll talk about how we will build that messaging plan. So why messaging matters. So I've mentioned that a little bit in the last slide, but when you build out your messaging plan, and every nonprofit should have one, right? So we call these message Bibles when we work with our clients. And sorry, swallowed wrong. And if your organization does not have a messaging Bible, you need to make one. This is a general messaging document that is your hymn book, to make another Bible reference. And everyone in your organization needs to be singing from that hymn book. So whether it's the mission and values of your organization, or what projects you're working on, or what you're fundraising towards, if you're on a capital campaign or whatever it may be, what is the messaging and how is everyone in your organization saying the same thing? Whether they're asking for money, you're speaking to the media, or presenting to your board, it needs to be the same across the board. And the messaging now needs to change. And so what does that mean? You take that current messaging you have that you've been using for the last 2-3 years, and you adapt it to show again, that resilience and that strength that your organization has, even in a tough time. And providing an opportunity to look inward into your organization and see your value and build the empathy that provides an opportunity that this might be uncertain times for us, but here's what we're doing to make sure that we survive these uncertain times. And we all, if you watch the governor's press conference this week to announce 1SC's involvement with food banks across the state, you saw a messaging from Aaron, the CEO of Harvest Hope, and Georgia at the Community Foundation, build that bridge of empathy, of helping people understand what these uncertain times mean and why it matters today differently than it mattered 6 months ago. And without that shift, right, if both of those women came to the podium this week and just said the same things they always say, people wouldn't understand what was going on. And so developing that resilience and building out that empathy was critical to what they were trying to message to the public. And then it also continues to allow you as leaders within your organization or the leaders within your organization to show the confidence and leadership within the mission of your nonprofit. And so as you shift this messaging document and you adapt to where we are today, because I would be shocked, and please raise your hand if this does not apply to you, is that every organization on this call has had to shift this year because of the change in funding, whether it's state funding or federal funding, or just donations being on an individual level changing a little bit due to the changing in our society and in again, what's happening across our country over the last 10 months on a funding level, because nonprofits might be losing their grants, but so are companies and so are corporations, and funding is across the board being affected. And so that goes to the bottom line of individuals as well. And so showing that confidence within your leadership and your mission in your messaging is incredibly important as you guys are developing your conversations with your stakeholders. Again, this is a variety of people, and every message might be different, but the ultimate goal and the ultimate message is the same, right? So how you speak to a board member may be different than how you speak to the media. And that might also may be different than how you speak to a donor. but you're saying the same thing across all three of those stakeholder groups. You just might be approaching it differently because their approach to your organization is different. And that's okay. But having that in writing and having that in that message Bible that I mentioned is going to allow the success of your organization to be more prudent, because you have something that there is an expectation. Here is what we're saying. Here is our mission. Here is how our mission has been affected. Here is what we're doing in this affected time that shows that empathy of what you guys are trying to build as an organization. And then here's our strength. Here is what we're doing to make sure that those who are talking to us understand that we're going to fight forward, and here's how we're going to do so. And then mobilizing those networks to share that messaging. Your messaging Bible can be used with your social media team or your PR team, but then also with your internal and external communicators across the stakeholder groups, and they become your advocates. We tell people all the time, it takes 7 times for someone to hear something before it actually resonates. And so what that means is that if you have a message that needs to get across to talk about whether it's fundraising goals or advocacy goals or programming goals with your nonprofit, you need to say it 7 times so they hear it. And if you say it the exact same way 7 times, it's not as useful than as if you say it on your social media platforms, and then you say it in a press release, and then you say it in a newsletter, and then you say it in a board meeting, and then you say it in a fundraising request. If you say the same thing across all of those platforms and people see it each time, they're going to know, A, you're serious, B, you're organized, and C, what you're saying is actually going to resonate and it's going to make a difference. And that, again, helps you build that advocacy for your organization. Yeah. So 3 pillars of adaptive messaging, and we talked a little bit about this, but this is allowing you to take what you currently are using and adapt it to the current environment. So first is clarity. You want to make sure that you are sharing all the information you can in a clear, transparent way. You need to make sure that every person within your stakeholder groups understand what you're going through, but understand it in a way that they understand it. You understand it in a very different way. I talk with our team members all the time about, as they work as a consultant across a number of industries, what does it mean when you say something to them that they may not understand? I'll give you an example. We obviously work a lot with the media, and we talk about the 9 a.m. Meeting that happens every morning in a newsroom. That's kind of an assignment meeting. And as we tell clients, they're like, oh, I want to do a press conference at 9, or I want to do a press conference at 9:30, or I want to send out a press release at 9. And our team will say to them repeatedly, well, let's get past the team meeting at 9 and do it at 10:30. Well, if you've never been in a newsroom, if you've never been a reporter, if you've never worked in PR, you don't understand what that means. Me telling you there's a 9 a.m. meeting, even if I tell you it is a team meeting or a news meeting, you still don't understand what that means. And what it actually means is that every person in the newsroom that day is sitting down and looking at the calendar. What's happening? Who's having a press conference? Who needs to drive 30 minutes to this manufacturing facility because they're doing a ribbon cutting? What is happening? What's been sent to the newsroom? And then how are they dividing it up? Is there a reporter who's on 3 stories, which means they only have 10 minutes to be at each story? Or is there one person who's spending all day on a specific issue? That is all happening in that 9 a.m. meeting. And so if you try to get their attention during that meeting, you're going to fall on deaf ears. And so, as I mentioned, when we say to a client, well, let's not do it during that 9 a.m. meeting, you just think to yourself, well, they'll see it when they get out of the meeting. Well, no, if they've already had the meeting and you haven't sent it yet, you're getting ignored because they've already made their assignments. Or if you're trying to do something during that meeting, they have a hard time getting away from that meeting because it's an expectation every day that they sit through it and get their assignment. So giving that clarity is critical for people to understand what you're actually asking for. And so if you have lost a federal grant or a state earmark this year, and you go to a donor and say, we really need to fill this donut hole that we have, helping them be clear and understanding of what that actually means is going to provide more context to the people that you're asking for something. If you've lost a federal grant and you've lost it for one time, but you feel confident you'll get it next year, tell them that. If you feel like you've lost it and you're never getting it back, definitely tell them that. Because that's going to give them the clarity they need to better understand the choices that they're making as a supporter of your organization. With that clarity, adapting that message is going to allow you to be more successful. Next is the empathy. I've talked a little bit about this as well, but making sure that people truly understand what it means. During the press conference this week that I mentioned with the governor, I heard about how over 50% of our SNAP beneficiaries in South Carolina are children. That is an empathetic statistic. And sharing that during that press conference is a way to make people understand what it really is meaning to our communities. And building out that empathy for people to truly grasp where we are as a community and as a society and whatever you're talking about, right? I'm just using this week's press conference as an example, but all of you have examples that people need to understand the true empathy and value of what you are bringing to these communities and what it means. Because if you just say South Carolina has X% of people who are affected by Y, okay, that number may be really touching or it could be heartfelt, but what does it really mean? Does it mean that that percentage of people are not getting meals? Does it mean that that percentage of people aren't getting the education that they need? You need to take it a step further, especially in today's society, to make sure people understand the true empathy that goes into whatever it is you're trying to present to them. And then value. I deal with this a lot on the boards that I serve on of, the need to ask for a lot of money, support, advocacy, just kind of day-to-day needs. What is the value that these folks are bringing to you, and how can you make sure they understand that value? Everyone has limited resources. Every organization has incredible outcomes and roles in our community. And what does that mean? What is the value that you're bringing? And this goes back to the clarity, because each and every one of you understand your value and understand your organization's value without question, better than anybody. But if you don't provide clear messaging of what that value is, you may know it and you may feel it, and it's going to be innate to you, that if you don't share it in a way that is clear and valuable to the person who you're sharing it with, it's not going to come across. Because I talk to folks all the time that something may be innate to us, right? We may know how to make a equation in an Excel spreadsheet without even thinking about it, or we may understand the funding models of the federal government without even blinking an eye, but the person we're talking to doesn't. And so we have to make sure that we don't get held back by what we know to be innate, and if we're not presenting it in a way that has value, empathy, but then also that clear perspective of what the messaging is. And again, I would be shocked to find an example of a nonprofit today that doesn't need to take the messaging they've been using in the last 3 to 6 months and shift it to make sure that people truly understand what's happening within the needs of their nonprofit across the state and the country. So messaging in action, I give a little bit of an example, and I'll dissect this a little bit, but the example I had was, due to federal cuts, our programs will face challenges, okay? I'm sure a sentence like that has been written in almost everything or anything you guys have sent out, if this pertains to you. But then I grew it out a little bit and wanted to share that. So federal funding changes mean fewer resources for families in need. With your support, we can keep critical programs strong and continue serving our community. Obviously, I don't have any examples and any specifics in there, I should say, of what that is. Education, meals, healthcare, whatever it may be. Obviously, those specifics need to be in there. But I wanted to show you the difference. They mean the same thing. Those 2 sentences mean, or 3 sentences mean the same thing. But when you use different language or provide more context, it allows you to better understand how big the challenge is. And so if you were someone who provided, healthcare services, then it would mean fewer healthcare services for families in need, 50% of South Carolinians will go without critical dental care, which, what does that mean? Someone who serves without, or someone who is suffering with a cavity for longer than 6 months has the chance to whatever the answer is. Obviously making that up, but making sure that people understand the value of the service you provide means, in that example, this person with a cavity is not going to suffer for whatever the next step happens with a, with a cavity that goes untreated. It also means that they're not then going to an emergency room because they're in tooth pain and they don't know where else to go. It also means that the funds needed to go to that, right? I mean, it is an ever evolving, ball that rolls down the hill, and people, again, it is innate to you all. You all know all of that. You know what the repercussions of every step not being served means. And you may think these folks you're talking to because they serve on your board or because they're an executive at a corporation, you may think they know that. They don't. And they'd admit to you that they don't, right? Or they're just not paying attention. So sharing that information is as valuable and as clear as you can is critical. So reframing those funding gaps to show your challenges, to make your challenges clear and concise is critical. And then making sure that everyone within your organization helps develop the solution. So what does that mean? As you are developing kind of what the future of your organization looks like on a funding level, on a programming level, on a support level, everyone needs to be a part of how you get there. So your board will have a different path than your donors, than your staff, than your partners, but everyone needs to know where they fall in that story. And so making that a part of that messaging document that I mentioned is really critical to make sure that you are continuing to fall down that yellow brick road step by step. If you go out into the world trying to help your organization get more funding or have more support or get more media attention, let's say, and you're just throwing spaghetti at a wall, that's what it's going to look like. But if you're doing it in a way where it is organized and concise and put together and in a plan, it's not going to look like spaghetti sauce on a white wall. It's going to look like you have deliberately cut through a loaf of bread in a way that is looks like you might have measured it. And that way it looks cleaner and concise and provides that value that your organization needs. So mobilizing donor and stakeholder support. When you're developing your messaging plan here, there's a variety of tiers and opportunities of channels that you can communicate through. So I mentioned a number of times, right? Your donors, your community partners, that's your board members, that's your supporters, that's your partners, elected officials, that could also be kind of the media and those kind of who are watching your organization in a variety of different kind of buckets within that stakeholder group. But when you're developing your messaging, each of these stakeholders need to have a specific goal in order to develop that right plan for them. So with your donors, what the urgency is, what the impact means, what the value is. With your community partners, what solving those challenges look like, what the steps are, what you're doing to progress the ball forward. And then with your elected officials and your media, what are those real stories? Who is being affected? Who is, Mr. Bob, who is affected by that toothache that I mentioned? And what does it mean for him to get the support that you're providing? Providing those real world stories and being a storyteller is only going to elevate what your messaging is, especially in today's world when everyone is kind of scrambling to redevelop their message. And then using multi-channel communication. So as I mentioned earlier, someone has to hear something 7 times for it to actually break through. And so what are those 7 channels that you're doing that messaging through? I'm sure you all have what you have continued to do month after month and year after year, whether it's a newsletter or social media, or some of you might have an earned media plan or a paid media plan, or online ads or whatever it may, events, whatever it may be. But if you don't do any of those things I just mentioned, developing a multi-channel plan is critical because you need those different channels to communicate your message. But if you're only doing one or two, what can you add to someone's plate? How can you add another one, even if it doesn't cost any money, to make sure that you are communicating across multi-channels to make sure that everyone is hearing the message that needs to hear it? And then call to action. That is one of the biggest mistakes I see in messaging, especially with nonprofits, is that there is no call to action at the end of the communication. It could be as simple as click here. It can be as sophisticated as fill out this survey, or give money or help volunteer. But if you don't give them something to do, they move on. Think how effective those like very silly and the ones that drain my bank account ads on Instagram to sell me that sweater on Amazon, right? Like I think I'm wearing one right now. But it's effective because there's a button and I can click it and it does it for me and it's easy and simple. And that's what we need to do as we're communicating to our supporters within these nonprofits to make it as simple and easy and effective for them as possible. And so developing those clear calls to action are really important when developing that plan. So some steps as you guys put together, hopefully this messaging plan, if you already have one, adapting it to this new adaptive messaging that's necessary in this kind of new world that we're in right now, is first acknowledging your challenges. Acknowledge where we are right now. Acknowledge what is affecting your organization. And if it's being held back from being successful, why is it? Just be brutally honest with yourself and with your team members. This is a great exercise as a collaborative team environment where you can sit down and talk through what are those challenges, what are you hearing, and how can we fix them? But figuring out what those are first and foremost is critical because then you're developing steps to how to change that. Two is figuring out the messaging frame around what is the positive effect to how to change those challenges. So you figure out your challenge, and then the next step is how are we communicating on those challenges in a positive way? You don't just want to tell all your donors we're out of money or we're losing all of our funding, right? Like that's not a positive way to frame it. But you can say we've lost our federal funding, and what that means is that we need to develop a unique fundraising model that gets us to $1 million by the end of the year. That is a way to frame the message positively without causing people panic. Next is making sure you have a human interest story. I mentioned that a slide back, but having something or someone or a story that allows people to understand the outcomes of what you're trying to achieve is critical. And as part of your messaging plan, you need to have multiple versions of those. But that also, if you're a statewide organization, who do you have in Greenville? Who do you have in Charleston? Who do you have in Rock Hill? Because the people in Greenville don't care about the people in Charleston. I know we like to say people would try to deny that, but it is true. The people in Greenville want to talk to the people in the upstate. They think they're better for whatever reason. They think their lives are easier for whatever reason. And the people in Charleston are going to say the exact same things. So what are your human interest stories that are tailored to the areas in which your organization serves? Aligning your voices. This is that messaging plan. This is that hymnal that I mentioned at the beginning of making sure that whatever your adaptive messaging to today's world looks like, how are you making sure that from the CEO of your organization through the board members of your board to your staff to the commenters on social media, that they're all using the same message and understand the right story to make sure that you are communicating in a way that is aligned and clear. And then measuring your impact. Donors love a statistic. They love to know where their money's going and what it means, and being able to provide those measuring tools, the quantitative data, and making sure that this messaging is working is important. And so stepping through these examples and each of these steps is going to help you build out that plan, that messaging, to make sure that it's successful as you adapt into today's kind of new society. So looking ahead, we will continue to shift. We have no idea what's going to happen with the government. I suspect that we will continue to stay shut down through the weekend and next week. But what does that mean for you? What does that mean for the organization? And this uncertainty, unfortunately, is our new normal. Will we get our state grants back next year? Don't know. And we can't plan on it, right? We can't plan on them coming back. We obviously are not going to plan on them not coming back, but we have to have plans and messaging around this uncertainty. And then being able to adapt to those uncertainties quickly and connect to your stakeholders in an empathetic way is going to make you stand out, as the slide says, because not everyone is changing how they communicate. They're just sharing information without understanding what this shift means to everybody outside their organization. So being able to do it in these clear steps is definitely going to make you stand out. And then obviously we want to survive. We want to build our relationships and show resilience and make sure that the community across South Carolina understands the importance of what it is that you guys do day to day, and is able to build out a messaging reactor to the goals and the programming that you guys are adapting across the state every single day. But making sure that people in your stakeholder groups and in the environments around you understand the importance of what you guys do is imperative. And if you have this plan, if you have this messaging plan that you can give to everyone, whether it's a printed copy or a virtual copy, that people can just use as they build emails, as they develop social media content, as they write letters, you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's consistent and concise across the board. Something that I've seen folks do, I haven't seen them do it in a while, but ending an email with the same signature. Something that we kind of all laughed about, but has really dug in and been a part of South Carolina culture is when Governor Haley required that everyone in the government answer the phones. It's a great day in South Carolina. We all kind of giggled about it when she kind of made that announcement, but they still do it. And it is a message that has survived years. And it makes us feel a certain way. However it makes you feel that way, but it has been consistent across the board. And I like to use that as an example because it's a messaging tool that has seen success throughout years, and even as her administration has moved on. It's a funny messaging tactic, but it's something that you don't realize just a few words is going to change how people react to you. And as you guys are building your messaging guides and your strategies for your team, figuring out what makes you stand out is going to be critical to how you kind of survive the next few steps and the next few months and years as we kind of go through this new world that we have. So call to action, and then I will stop sharing my screen and happy to take questions. And kind of just summarize the slides today is clarity. So staying simple, staying clear, and making sure that everyone across your stakeholder groups are understanding what it is you're dealing with at the level that they need to understand it. If you tell them it's hard, that's all they know. If you tell them it's hard because X, Y, and Z, they will understand it better. If you provide that empathy to people and make sure that they understand what it not just means to your organization, but what it means to the 4,000 people you served last month or last year, then there's going to be a quantitative aspect to what they're hearing. And so that empathy is really, really important. I know I've mentioned the press conference that happened this week with the governor, but I will just tell you on a personal level, watching that press conference, it took my husband and I into action. Like, we are doing a food drive. We have people dropping food off at our house today. And that all happened just because of what we heard. We heard the empathy in their voices. We heard the need for action in their voices. And they gave us a call to action, right? They said what they needed. They said when they needed it. And it allowed us to find a way to bring our community together to fight for that action. Showing your value, again, what it is that you do that's unique, what it is that you do that provides a service to a community, whether that's multiple communities or one community, And then giving that call to action, that invitation to tell people what to do, to give them an idea of how to sustain your organization and your values and your mission. All of that is incredibly critical. And I'll just end real quick before I take questions to say, none of this you've never heard, right? Nothing I said today is new to you, but it is the need to adapt it to today's society is what is new to it. All of you have heard the importance of messaging. All of you have heard the importance of call to action. You all have examples of why those things matter in nonprofits, but the conversation today is the critical piece of it is everything you've done in the past has to change because we're in a different world. And we have to make sure that those who are supporting our organization understand what that different world means to you, because everyone will have a different answer to that. They can't just know, oh, it's crazy out there. It's crazy out there for everybody, right? So what does that mean specifically to what you are providing to the community? That's why today is different. And that's why kind of changing what might look like it's the right thing to do because you did it last year and it was successful last year may not be the right step. And you know, what we're dealing with in today's society is the reason why. So I will make it so folks can ask questions. And if there were any in the chat, Karen and team, feel free to pass along.
Yes. Amanda, we had a question. Some of our nonprofits do serve statewide, but they are located in a specific area. And I think this question was geared towards when you were talking about making stories local and sharing locations specific to where you're located. But what advice would you give? How would you adapt that when the organization is statewide and they're looking for support outside of where they're physically located?
It's a great question. We serve a nonprofit in Charleston that we have spent years trying to build a reputation and a footprint in the communities outside of Charleston. And because that's where they're comfortable, that's where all their staff is, it's where their headquarters is, but they are a statewide organization. And so ways that we've done that is by finding those personal stories in those other markets. So if there is a person who's been affected by whatever it is that this organization serves in Rock Hill, let's go tell that story to the Rock Hill media market, or Charlotte media market. If it's in Greenville, do the same thing. But if you have a story to tell in Charleston, because that's where you're located, find that same story in the markets across the state, whether it's by county, whether it's by media market, whatever it may be. You need to make sure that you're replicating it across the different areas of the state, or those areas will never know that you do what you do because you're going to stay so close to where you're most comfortable. But don't, as I said, don't bring that Charleston person to Greenville, right? Like find the replica, or find a similar story in wherever those markets are.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. I see we have another one from Karen. It asks, how often should we be reviewing our message hymnal, given that events feel like they're changing daily?
Yeah, I typically say annually. In a normal world, I would review your messaging documents every year. If you have a director of communications or someone who manages that, or whether it's internal or external, they need to be sitting down with it every single year and in the same way you do a budget, to make sure that it doesn't need to change. But in kind of today's world, it might need to be more frequently, right? You might need to change it to have messaging that revolves around the government shutdown. And then when the government reopens, then you may need to go change it again because it's made for, a different communication tactic because now the government's reopened. And what does that mean, right? When the government reopens, it doesn't mean that everything goes back to normal, right? We have tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, that have to then get paid out. How quickly does that happen, right? And that's what people don't really understand. If you go ask the average person walking down Main Street in any city in South Carolina, what it means when the government reopens, they're going to think it means like we're all hunky-dory. And that's not the case. And so adapting your messaging when that happens is another shift that's required. And then an additional shift once things do calm down a little bit and the funding has been distributed. So I would say right now you probably need to look at it a little bit more frequently, but I think in a normal year, I think annually is very appropriate.
Thank you so much. Any other questions from folks online? We do have another one in the chat. If a nonprofit operates multiple programs, should we have a different hymnal for each program?
Great question. I would have one for your entire organization, just generally, and then I would have subsets within your messaging guide based on the different varieties of whatever your organization does. So if you have 4 programs, I would make sure there is messaging for each program so you're messaging it appropriately and accurately across the board. But I don't think you need like top line messaging for every single program. I think you need your general messaging for the organization, and then you need some kind of subsets to make sure that whether it's a program or an event or anything that your organization does, kind of frequently throughout the year, then you can develop that subset messaging to then add to the general messaging as part of your organization.
Okay. Thank you so much. And I see Alex has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. This was wonderful. A lot of great insights. I feel like it is definitely, I heard 2 different things, and the struggle between those 2 things, I just wanted to dive into more, I guess. And that is the need to be transparent, but also the need to be strong and be seen as, sustainable. You don't want people to feel like if they donate to you, they're throwing their money away because you're not going to be around. But how do you balance that with like the critical need and the transparency? Because I think it is dire for a lot of organizations. And so if we lean too far into the strength, then it's, oh, everything is fine, I don't actually need to help, versus I, don't want to throw my money. So that balance, I just kind of wanted to hear maybe a little more about what side do you lean on?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and happy to obviously have a conversation with others if you have insight for Alex as well. But at least in my experience, strength doesn't have to mean lying, right? You don't have to be telling an untruth. You just have to show a plan. Strength just means that you've thought it through, you have a strategy, you're coming in with your gloves up, right? And partnering that with transparency is okay, right? If you are in a dire situation, but you want people to know that you're fighting for that dire situation, that's transparency and strength. We're in this dire situation. We have 6 months of funding to hold us over. If we don't work, if you don't help us get supported, then, we're not sure what happens next, but here's our plan to make sure that we stay sustainable. Right? That's strength and transparency. If you were to just say, hey, it's dire, we need you, that's just transparency. Does that make sense?
100%. I like the fighting for it is actually,
that's the strength, right?
That feels powerful. Yeah, right. Not that we are necessarily in a strong or a steady situation, but it's more that we're here to fight. I love it.
We're going to fight for this. Here's how we're going to fight for this. It's dire, but you can count on us to make sure that we're doing everything we can.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Feel free to
I just saw one come up. Hang on.
There we go.
I can't. It says when leadership is hesitant to acknowledge or communicate changes that affect our programs, what is the best way to approach transparency messaging around those shifts? It's hard to obviously go against what your leadership is pushing, obviously. However, I think that Manly said that's a great question. I mean, it's necessary, right? And I think one way to show your leadership that might be hesitant in these situations is to show them examples, right? Leadership and I'm going to say this on a personal level too, like leadership is hesitant to be vulnerable, right? Because vulnerability when you're a leader or have a leadership role in an organization sometimes can be seen as a weakness. And when you show them that other people in their role or in similar situations or examples of what others are doing, it gives them the ability to say, okay, this might not be so bad. Or if that person has the strength to do that, then I can get the strength to do it. This is more, to me, this is more of a messaging, less of a messaging issue and more of kind of like a leadership management issue. But I think being able to show them, and you know, there are lots of examples, I'm happy to share them one-on-one, but there are lots of examples where organizations or individuals, whether they're elected officials or corporate leaders, have shown that vulnerability in this time, that I think that you could use as examples to kind of push your leadership to feel more comfortable with it. Anything else?
I mean, it's Karen. I've got something that's come up in the last day or two since the press conference that I thought we would use your big brain to think about for a second, and that's some nonprofits that have nothing to do with food insecurity, right? Maybe they're in affordable housing, maybe they run a literacy nonprofit, maybe they work with children, which again, given that stat of 50% of the SNAP benefits are going to children or not going to children effective November 1. But my question is, they were saying like, I'm not in the food, insecurity business. That's not what our nonprofit's mission is. But we're really concerned. We're a little bit of a month away from Giving Tuesday on December 2. We're trying to do our year-end giving. Our circumstances are dire in that we need funding to replace funding we've lost. Should we try to address or say something and acknowledge, what's going on in the food insecurity? Or should we try to tie what we're doing mission-wide to that? Because people are concerned that a lot of funding's going to go to food right now for obvious reasons. And they're also very concerned that funding is going to go outside of our country for humanitarian needs for Jamaica, given the Cat 5 hurricane that just hit there. So I understand their concern and their fear a month out from Giving Tuesday and 2 months out from the end of the fiscal year for many people, or calendar year. But what's your best advice about messaging sort of through that, knowing that there's a lot of competing messaging right now that's going to be going around on food and then nationally for humanitarian assistance?
Yeah, I think first on the food insecurity, I agree with the comment in the chat that food insecurity is bleeding over into all issues. That is absolutely correct. If a child is going to school hungry, they're not learning. If a child is not sleeping in a safe environment, they are unable to, do all of these things. And outside of children, right? Adults. If an adult is not eating, they're not going to their job or they're not performing at their job well. If they're not sleeping, they're not performing at their job well, right? So like all of these things, it's all cyclical, it's all a part of the life pendulum. And so there's no reason to ignore that food insecurity is obviously the topic of the day, but depending on what it is that your organization is doing, what is that tie-in, right? If people aren't eating, then what happens next? And how is that tied into what you do? Or if individuals aren't able to get the care that you all provide, what does that mean for the next step in society? And so I don't think you ignore the current situation, but I think you tie it all together. And I think that reminder, again, that goes back to like, everything is innate to you. In each of you, you know what those tie-ins are. You understand what it means that if someone doesn't have breakfast in the morning, that it affects their day at school, at work, and so forth. But the average person you're talking to, though I would love it to be innate to them, they don't. And so making sure that you're messaging it in a way that helps them understand that, I think is critical. On the humanitarian side, unfortunately, we just have to make sure that we are telling people the importance of what we're fighting for and what we're fighting against right now in the United States. And obviously helping Jamaica rebuild is critical. But we can't help another country rebuild if our country is falling apart, right? So just making sure that there's a balance there obviously is really, really important. All right, with 2 minutes to spare, I'm so proud.
Thank you so much,
All right.
Amanda.
Well, don't ever hesitate to reach out. My personal contact information is on our website, mpstrategy.com. Happy to answer questions one-on-one or provide any assistance that we can. So happy to walk through today, but as the days go on, if there's anything we can do to be helpful, obviously don't hesitate to reach out.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Amanda.